Tonight on NewsWatch, targeting the Tea Party, how the IRS is at it again, and what that means for conservative groups.
Plus, terror threat in toothpaste, the newly issued warning surrounding the Sochi Olympics.
And see how an oil boom has transformed one state into a land of prosperity. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. Good evening. I'm Mark Martin.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. The Internal Revenue Service caused an uproar last year when they targeted Tea Party groups. Now it seems they're doing it again.
Yeah, the agency is coming up with rules that appear aimed at silencing conservative organizations before the next crucial elections.
Paul Strand explains in tonight's top story.
Quietly over Thanksgiving, the IRS announced new rules that critics say would allow the agency to continue its tough targeting of Tea Party and other conservative groups. Lawyer Cleta Mitchell represented some of these groups when the IRS held up their tax-exempt status for years.
And subjected all of these groups to extreme scrutiny, burdensome questions. One of my clients received 102 questions from the IRS.
But Mitchell says what the IRS was doing quietly from 2009 to 13, it's now doing openly to the kind of 501c4 groups like most of the Tea Parties.
Now what the IRS is doing, it hasn't stopped. And in fact, now the IRS in plain sight is trying to make permanent all of the awful things they were doing to Tea Party groups and now extend that to every 501c4 organization in America and to make it permanent. It's really quite dreadful. It is indeed targeted. They know who they're trying to shut up.
Why would they do this?
I think that the IRS is going to do everything it can to silence anybody in America who wants to talk about how elected officials voted on Obamacare. I actually believe that that is the fundamental reason for all of this effort.
Mitchell has filed a Freedom of Information request to find out if the White House, Treasury, and IRS have been colluding in these efforts to muzzle Tea Party and other conservative groups. But Treasury has been stalling weeks past the legal deadline in getting documents to Mitchell. Paul Strand, CBN News, the IRS.
Tea Party leaders testifying today before Congress about IRS targeting. Lawyers appeared on behalf of groups suing the IRS. They're charging the agency harassed dozens of Tea Party and conservative groups and held up their tax-exempt status. They laughed off White House claims no top IRS officials specifically targeted conservative groups.
This wasn't an equal opportunity discrimination. This was targeted discrimination coming from the Internal Revenue Service. And what I'd like to address now is that our view is that that determination came from the highest ranks of the Internal Revenue Service.
During today's testimony, lawyers also contradicted claims the FBI is actively investigating the situation. 13 government agents are supposedly looking into it, but those agents haven't contacted any Tea Party officials in the groups allegedly targeted.
Joining us now with more is Jordan Sekulow of the American Center for Law and Justice. The ACLJ represents 41 Tea Party groups in a federal suit against the IRS. Jordan, Cleta Mitchell said in that piece we just saw that she believes this is all about silencing people who have spoken out against Obamacare. Do you agree?
Absolutely. You know, the clients, we represent 41 different groups in this case against the IRS, the civil lawsuit. And it was Eric Holder who said there may be criminal violation here. What was clear in the hearing today at the Government Oversight and Reform Committee is that there's no question that these groups were targeted inappropriately.
Well, Jordan, it is pretty brazen that the IRS would put rules into place permanently that discriminate against a particular viewpoint. Why do you think that they're so open about what they're doing?
They think that they almost got away with it this time, that Lois Lerner was rewriting the rules as the targeting was occurring. We just found that out. You know, this was something that came up in the hearing, but I think people are just starting to figure out. The rules were not changed after the targeting. They weren't changed because of the targeting and then, oh, there was trouble, people couldn't interpret the law, which, by the way, the rules have been in place on this law for C-Force since 1959. So suddenly all this, 50 years later, they now can't interpret the rule that's been in place so long.
Well, what is your reaction when you hear President Obama say that there's not even a smidgen of corruption at the IRS?
when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, the IRS is still being investigated. There are 6 active investigations. There's a civil lawsuit we filed. Another attorney today represents a group that's filed. There's some other groups that have filed their own independent lawsuits. That's just the civil side. Then there's DOJ, FBI, a number of different congressional investigations, and yet it's getting to a point, and I think to close on this, that where members of Congress are starting to come together, even these very powerful committees, like the committee the hearing was in today, the Government Oversight and Reform Committee, which has investigation power over any kind of government action, basically, that they are now coming to the conclusion, as Congressman Trey Gowdy said today, that there needs to be a special prosecutor appointed, or else this investigation won't move forward. So I think that's the point we're at, is that if the Obama administration wants to get away from the criticism of Barbara Bosserman and DOJ attorneys who donated, appoint an independent, a special prosecutor. They have the power to do so, and let's get to the bottom of it, because Congress, I think, is about done in their ability to get new information.
Jordan Sekulow of the ACLJ, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
As the Winter Olympics get underway, the Department of Homeland Security has a warning for international travelers. Terrorists may try to use toothpaste tubes filled with explosives to create a bomb. It's just the latest threat to the Games. Dale Hurd has details.
The Sochi Games are supposed to be about athletic competition, but the focus remains on security. There's concern athletes and fans are at risk before some even arrive at the Games. Airlines sending international flights into Russia have been warned by U.S. security officials. Militants may try to smuggle explosives on board inside toothpaste containers.
I believe it's very specific and credible information.
Sochi is located in Russia's North Caucasus region, only 300 miles from Islamic terrorist hotspots like Chechnya and Dagestan. These 2 areas want to break away from Russia and form an Islamic emirate. In December, suicide bombers killed 34 people northeast of Sochi in Volgograd, and Islamic terrorists in the Caucasus are threatening more attacks during the Games. A so-called security ring of steel has been built around the Olympic venues.
There are a number of specific threats of varying degrees of credibility that we're tracking.
There are already restrictions on carrying liquids and creams on flights. There's a long history of airline bomb plots with ever-changing tactics. Sochi security will also be on the lookout for so-called Black Widow terrorists.
These are women. These are female suicide bombers. Now, their husbands were terrorists who've been killed by Russian security services. So these Black Widows want revenge. And Pat, for them, it's personal.
With 44 world leaders coming to the Games and multiple venues to protect, Sochi is a security nightmare for the Russians, and it would seem that sport is the least of their worries. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Hope for passing immigration reform this legislative year is quickly fading, and House Speaker John Boehner is blaming the Obama administration. Boehner says, quote, "There's widespread doubt about whether this administration can be trusted to enforce our laws, and it's going to be difficult to move any immigration legislation until that changes." Republican leadership last week released their outline for immigration reform. The plan did not receive widespread support from rank-and-file House Republicans.
More than 3,000 gathered in Washington today for the National Prayer Breakfast. President Obama focused his remarks on how the U.S. can encourage religious freedom in other countries and made a plea for Pastor Saeed Abedini that many Christians are applauding. White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon reports.
Calling it key to national security and a central tenet of American diplomacy, President Obama focused his remarks on religious freedom and publicly called for the release of Christian missionary Kenneth Bae, who is imprisoned in North Korea, and Pastor Saeed Abedini, imprisoned in Iran.
We pray for Pastor Saeed Abedini. He's been held in Iran for more than 18 months, sentenced to 8 years in prison on charges relating to his Christian beliefs. And as we continue to work for his freedom, today, again, we call on the Iranian government to release Pastor Abedini so he can return to the loving arms of his wife and children in Idaho.
The persecution of Christians has increased in some countries. North Korea leads the list that includes Iraq, Afghanistan, and America's ally, Saudi Arabia. Diplomacy can be uncomfortable, the president says, especially when dealing with countries like China that are strategically and economically important to the U.S. The president says he stresses to Chinese leaders that China's potential rests on upholding universal rights, including rights for Christians. The commander-in-chief told the group of bipartisan lawmakers and policy shapers that he's thankful for God's guidance in his life, a faith journey that began with his work with churches as a community organizer.
I'm grateful not only because I was broke and the church fed me, but because it led to everything else. It led me to embrace Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. It led me to Michelle, the love of my life, and it blessed us with 2 extraordinary daughters.
Like religious persecution, poverty drains human dignity, according to Dr. Rajiv Shah. As the administrator for USAID, he's intimately associated with the world's woes and says by remaining devoted to faith, Christians can transform the world by helping to end extreme poverty.
Because this is now achievable, but only if all of us, from science, business, government, and faith, come together for the poor.
A woman who knows about overcoming shared her testimony. Hawaiian surfer Bethany Hamilton became a household name when she lost her left arm to a shark 10 years ago.
For many of us, it's easy to look at the things of this world to solve our challenges and the obstacles in life. But when we submit our lives to Christ, His grace, mercy, truth, peace, and love will bring true fulfillment to our lives.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, why a new education standard is sparking debate.
Welcome back. The fight over national education standards has intensified with the endorsement of a major evangelical group.
The National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference represents 40,000 churches, and it's backing what's known as the Common Core. Heather Sells has the story.
45 states have adopted the Common Core English and Math standards for grades K through 12. Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, president of the Hispanic Conference, says high education goals are a matter of biblical justice, noting rigorous standards must be available to all children, especially those in poverty. Liberty University English professor Karen Swallow Pryor also backs the Common Core. She says the English standards are helping to refocus kids on text analysis.
A lot of students come to us who have very rarely, if ever, actually read a text in school. Even some students who study English and do well in English have just kind of learned to get by having brilliant conversations. The Common Core standards are just simply asking students to read texts carefully, understand what a text is saying, and how it is making an argument, which is really important.
Opposition to the core is growing, however, with parent groups pushing back against what they perceive as federal overreach. The Department of Education encouraged states to adopt the standards by tying in federal funding. Critics say the copyrighted standards make local control over education difficult at best.
Parents can't get relief from their state officials. They really can't get relief from federal officials in many respects, and they're left with no one to go to.
The Washington Post reports talk show host and core supporter Mike Huckabee is now urging core creators to rebrand, noting that the Common Core name has become, quote, toxic. That strategy may or may not appease parents who worry they're losing their ability to influence just what is taught in school. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Dr. Alan Arroyo is the Dean of the School of Education at Regent University. Dr. Arroyo, we just saw Heather's piece. What do you think about the math and English standards in Common Core?
Well, the Common Core standards are really about 5 years old. There are many other standards that other states produced. Virginia has its own standards. It does not have Common Core. The argument for Common Core is that state standards helps equality. We have a mobile society, so as they move from state to state, at least you would have the same curriculum.
Do you like them?
I think they're good guidelines.
Okay.
I think any standards that end up in testing and with, strict rules that says, that say unless you test them, you won't move on.
Why are parents?
That's a problem.
Why are parents so concerned about this? Are they concerned that national standards are going to be driving the curriculum?
Well, and that's exactly what's happening in 45 states. Now, again, people say, well, that's a good thing because people move and we'll have more equality with minorities. The bottom line is this, that the more local control you can get in the curriculum, what's being done, how your teachers are being trained, how they're being selected, how their principals are running the schools, that's the real issue.
And that's better. You would prefer that, local control.
That's much better because just having standards does not equate to quality education per se.
Well, of course, they are controversial, but does this look like is Common Core the new future? Are universities going to be training their teachers like this?
Absolutely. Everyone's all in. Unfortunately, they're not as rigorous. Our state standards of learning in Virginia are a lot more rigorous standards, and kids are taught more skills, more content at a younger age than they are in the Common Core.
Okay, bottom line then, Common Core, is it really making a difference in the way most teachers teach?
It's not only guiding, but it's directing and commanding how teachers teach, and that has a lot of issues to it. But basically, teachers are saying, you're taking away my creativity. I can still teach and teach well, but teaching exactly to these standards and to a test is not a good idea.
All right, sounds like something we definitely need to keep our eyes on in the future.
Definitely.
All right, Dr. Royer, thanks so much for coming over from Regent. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.
When you think of North Dakota, you might not picture a land of prosperity.
It's not the first thing that comes to mind, but that's exactly what it's becoming thanks to a huge oil boom.
Yeah, David Brody explains in tonight's Focus Report.
History books tell us about the famous California gold rush in the 1800s when people headed west to strike it rich. Well, welcome to western North Dakota, where an oil rush is on for people like Curtis Hansel.
This is not a boom that's going to fizzle in 3 or 4 or 5 years. This is going to be a long time, a 30-year boom.
This big boom covers more than 200,000 square miles in the Bakken oil fields. Now, this isn't a Beverly Hillbilly strike because the oil is actually in underground rock. New drilling technology called fracking means that the roughly 170 billion barrels of crude oil can now be unearthed. Oil production has zoomed up 600% in the last 7 years, putting North Dakota as the second largest oil-producing state in the nation, behind only Texas. Well, we are here on an active oil rig in the Bakken oil fields of western North Dakota. There are about 180 or so oil rigs here in the state. And one reason many families are coming specifically here to the western part of the state is because of all of the economic possibilities. In many oil operations, workers keep their family and home in another state. But in this case, many families choose to live here permanently. Curtis Hansel left his Utah real estate job and brought his family here 2 years ago.
I realized that this was an opportunity to get in on the cusp of something that I think will be good for us in the long run.
It's been good for the Hansel family and many others. The average oil worker out here makes $112,000. Beginners start at $66,000. And even those not in the oil business are making more. The population increase means more demand. So the local McDonald's and Walmart are hiring workers starting at $14 an hour. And many times they add a healthy signing bonus just for agreeing to work there. On the other end of the scale, the number of North Dakota millionaires has climbed rapidly. Last year, the state ranked 43rd in millionaire households. Now, they're up to 29th on the list and climbing.
We have been able to live very comfortably, enjoy some things, for instance, vacations, those kinds of things, and still put a good chunk of money away for the future.
And there's more good economic news here. A staggering low 3% unemployment rate, 75,000 jobs created in the past few years, and a state economy growing at 5 times the national average. All of this has led to some growing pains, however. Dennis Johnson is mayor of Dickinson, a town where the oil boom has been a mixed blessing.
The majority of the people, probably somewhere around 60 to 70%, are positively impacted by the oil development. But there's probably a minority of 30 to 40% that it's a negative impact.
Take housing, for example. Demand is so great that 2-bedroom apartments that used to rent for $500, they're now going for close to $2,500.
It's increased our housing costs quite a bit, and I feel sorry for people that don't have the big oil jobs.
And the increase in people has led to more crime, especially among the young single men hoping to strike it rich.
It's a scary place out here for women. And when girls come out here now, they think it's flattering like I did when I first got out here. And I very quickly reassure them that it's not, and they need to be very careful because these guys they'll take advantage of you.
There's no doubt this Bakken oil field area has challenges, but for Curtis Hansel and families like his, the positives surely outweigh the negatives.
If we do our part, that God will take care of us. And we've had to put that to the test a number of times, and so I don't want to make it sound like it's routine, but for my wife and I, it was just another challenge.
That challenge is proving fruitful for the thousands striking it rich in the oil fields of North Dakota. David Brody, CBN News, in western North Dakota.
Looks like I'm heading to North Dakota, Mark. Well, up next, how CBN is using social media to help share the good news. Well, CBN is using the internet to reach people with the good news.
Yeah, more people than ever are using the Club 700 OI Facebook page. The program airs weekly throughout Latin America and on the U.S. Hispanic Network. On the Facebook page, viewers can interact with CBN counselors and receive prayer for salvation, healing, and finances. Currently, more than 500,000 people are being reached each week. And don't forget, you can always connect with CBN News online. You can find us on Facebook as well, Twitter, and at our website, cbnnews.com.
Yeah, please follow me and Mark on Twitter and, of course, on our Facebook pages.
Right.
Just go to Facebook and you'll see us.
Yeah, you bet.
That's going to do it for this edition of NewsWatch.
Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.